It was a typical afternoon in the quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved from their porches and kids ran around, playing in the streets. Little did I know that this seemingly peaceful day would quickly spiral into a nightmare. A nightmare that no parent should ever have to live through. My heart still races when I think back to the moment that shattered everything we knew about trust, decency, and humanity. It wasn't just a disagreement over property lines or a minor quarrel with the HOA, Homeowners Association. It was so much more than that. Imagine this. You are a parent doing everything you can to protect your child, to make sure they feel loved, safe, and accepted. Now, imagine a person who would go to the most unimaginable lengths to tear that sense of security apart just because of their own twisted beliefs. What would you do if someone locked your disabled child in a cage meant for animals and coldly told you she doesn't deserve better? How far would you be willing to go to fight back against this cruelty? That was the day everything changed. My daughter, born with a disability, had always faced more challenges than most of us could even imagine. From the moment she was born, I promised to do everything in my power to give her a life filled with love, dignity, and respect. But on that day, someone saw fit to strip her of that dignity, to treat her as less than human, all in the name of a petty vendetta. It wasn't just a random act of cruelty. This was deliberate. This was premeditated. The HOA Karen, the woman who had been giving us trouble for weeks, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She locked my daughter in a dog cage and, with a smile on her face, declared that she doesn't deserve better. The chilling words that followed still echo in my mind, as if they were etched into my soul. But there's more to this story, and you won't believe how it unfolds. I still can't wrap my head around what happened next. The shock, the disbelief, the rage, it was all so overwhelming. But it wasn't just the action itself that left me speechless, it was the cold, calculating way in which it was done. My daughter, vulnerable and defenseless, was locked away in that cage as if she were nothing more than a piece of property, and the worst part? The person who did it felt no remorse, no guilt, no empathy for the child she had just hurt. The question that kept swirling in my mind was, how could someone be so heartless? How could a person, someone who had once been a neighbor, a fellow human being, treat another person like that? How far had the hatred in her heart gone? And what kind of person would do something so vile without a second thought? As a parent, I've faced challenges before. I've had to fight for my daughter's rights, her dignity, and her well-being. But never in my life did I imagine that I would have to fight against a person who would go this far to break her spirit. This story is not just about an HOA dispute. It's about the lengths some people will go to harm others when they think they have power, and the lengths we will go to when we are pushed to our breaking point. This isn't just about me or my daughter. It's about every single person who has ever been targeted, belittled, or harmed by someone in power. It's about every person who has faced discrimination or been dehumanized. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful, no matter how much it costs. But don't think this story is over. In fact, it's only just beginning. What happened that day sparked a series of events that no one could have predicted. The moment my daughter was locked in that cage, I knew I had to fight, not just for her, but for every person who has ever felt small, insignificant, or helpless. This fight was bigger than one woman. It was about taking a stand against cruelty, against injustice, against the hatred that threatens to tear us apart. So, as you read on, remember this. You are about to hear the shocking truth. A truth that might make you question everything you thought you knew about humanity. You'll witness the lengths one person went to in order to try and break us, and the incredible strength it took to stand up to it. You won't believe the twists and turns the story takes, but one thing is for sure, it will stay with you forever. And by the end, you'll understand why this story isn't just mine, it's a fight for all of us. Are you ready to hear what happened next? The truth is more shocking than you can possibly imagine. Stay tuned. I never imagined that the peaceful community we had called home for years would become the backdrop for one of the most horrifying experiences of our lives. My daughter, Lily, was born with a disability that made everyday tasks more challenging, but Nothing could dampen her spirit. She was bright, full of life, and despite the obstacles she faced, always wore a smile that lit up the room. I, as her father, did everything in my power to protect her, to make sure she felt valued and safe. Our home was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she could thrive, surrounded by people who understood and accepted her. But there was one person who couldn't see her for who she truly was, a woman in the neighborhood, known by all as Karen, the HOA representative. Karen was a figure of power in the community, often quick to judge and eager to impose her own rules and authority on others. From the beginning, we had a strained relationship with her. Small complaints about lawn care, mailbox placement, and other trivial matters that in the grand scheme of things seemed insignificant. But Karen's behavior was more than just about rules. It was about control, about exerting power over those she deemed inferior. The tension between us grew as Karen started taking issue with anything and everything we did, often targeting my daughter for reasons that seemed to go beyond simple property violations. The calm, suburban atmosphere that once felt so safe began to feel suffocating as Karen's actions escalated, leading to something far worse than we ever imagined. What started as petty disputes over neighborhood rules quickly spiraled into something deeply personal, something that would forever change our lives. Our neighborhood was everything we had dreamed of. Nestled on a quiet street lined with trees and well-kept homes, it seemed like the perfect place to raise a family. The houses were all spaced comfortably apart, with manicured lawns and neat flower beds that gave the area a calm, almost serene feel. The streets were safe, and the sense of community was strong. Neighbors often waved at each other, chatting as they walked their dogs or worked in their gardens. It was a picture-perfect suburban life, one where everyone had their space, yet there was a collective bond that kept the community thriving. But as idyllic as the surroundings were, there was a darker undercurrent that started to creep into our lives. The Homeowners Association, HOA, which was supposed to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood, quickly became a source of tension. At first, we didn't think much of it. The HOA was there to ensure that the rules were followed, guidelines about lawn care, property maintenance, and common areas. We were happy to comply and just enjoy our home. However, it didn't take long before we noticed how rigid and petty the HOA could be. What seemed like simple, harmless neighborhood guidelines began to feel more like a set of arbitrary rules meant to control every aspect of our lives. Small infractions were blown out of proportion. Our mailbox, which we had installed as per the previous HOA's recommendation, was suddenly deemed unacceptable by Karen, the HOA representative. She demanded that we replace it immediately despite no prior complaints. Over time, these small confrontations grew, with Karen taking issue with even the slightest deviations from her ideal of perfect order. It wasn't just about rules anymore, it was personal. We began to feel like we were constantly walking on eggshells, worried about what Karen would complain about next. What had once been a peaceful, carefree environment now felt tense, with each day carrying the possibility of a new complaint or confrontation. The sense of tranquility that we had once cherished in our neighborhood was slowly being replaced with a feeling of unease and anxiety. Little did we know, this growing chaos would soon reach a boiling point, one that would forever alter the sense of peace we had taken for granted. It all began with something as simple as a mailbox. What should have been a minor issue, one that could have been easily resolved, became the spark that ignited a conflict that would soon spiral out of control. Our mailbox, which had been installed according to the guidelines of the HOA's previous committee, was suddenly deemed unacceptable by Karen, the HOA representative. She insisted that the mailbox's design violated the HOA's aesthetic rules and demanded we replace it immediately, despite no one having previously raised any concerns about it. At first, we tried to brush it off as just another small complaint, but Karen's persistent attitude left us frustrated and confused. Why was she singling us out? This minor disagreement quickly escalated into something far more personal. Karen, who had once been just another neighbor in the community, began to target us more aggressively. It was no longer about the mailbox, it was about us. She started scrutinizing everything we did, from the positioning of our garbage cans to the height of our grass, looking for any excuse to file a complaint. Each complaint felt more petty and intrusive than the last, but what hurt the most was the way she seemed to take particular issue with my daughter, Lily. Lily, who was born with a disability, had always been my top priority. We had worked hard to create an environment where she could feel safe, loved, and comfortable. But Karen didn't see her as a child with potential and worth. Instead, she saw her as an inconvenience. The first time Karen made a direct comment about Lily, it was in passing. She remarked that children like Lily shouldn't be allowed to run around unsupervised. It was a subtle comment, but it stung. We tried to ignore it, hoping it was just an offhand remark, but it was clear that Karen's hostility toward my daughter was growing. The next escalation came when Karen approached me during a neighborhood meeting, publicly questioning my daughter's right to participate in a community event. "She doesn't belong here," she said, her words dripping with judgment. I could feel my heart racing as she spoke, and I could see the hurt in Lily's eyes as she overheard the conversation. Karen's disdain for Lily was no longer hidden. It was blatant, cruel, and hard to ignore. It didn't stop there. Karen's actions began to take an emotional toll on Lily. What should have been a carefree childhood was now filled with anxiety. She started withdrawing from activities she once loved, and her self-esteem began to plummet. As a parent, it broke me to see my daughter, so full of life and potential, slowly retreating into herself. Her confidence was being shattered by the constant barrage of negativity from Karen, and I could see it affecting her every day. Despite all the tension, I held on to hope that it would eventually end. But it only worsened. One afternoon, Karen crossed a line that I could never have imagined. She locked my daughter in a dog cage in her backyard and told me that Lily didn't deserve better. This wasn't just a minor dispute, it was an attack on my daughter's dignity, and it was the final straw. I knew that whatever was happening in our neighborhood had gone far beyond petty complaints. Karen's cruelty was no longer about enforcing rules. It was personal, and it was deeply harmful. It was clear that we were no longer dealing with just a neighbor with a vendetta, but with someone who was willing to hurt my family for reasons I could not understand. The emotional toll on our family was immense, and as a father, I knew it was time to take a stand. What had started as a misunderstanding over something as trivial as a mailbox had turned into a war over our family's well-being, and it was no longer something we could ignore. The day it all came to a head was like any other, or at least I thought it was. The sun was high, and the neighborhood buzzed with the usual hum of summer. But for my daughter, Lily, this day would be different. This day would mark the culmination of weeks of escalating tension, of growing dread of a woman, Karen, who had become something far more than just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a threat, and on this day, her cruelty would reach its peak. It all started when I got a call from Lily's school. She had been having a difficult morning, and the anxiety that had been building in her from weeks of Karen's comments had finally broken through. She was panicked, shaking, and barely able to speak. As a parent, it felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't the same child who had once been so full of life and confidence. Karen had taken that from her. When I arrived home, I could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right. As I pulled up, I saw Karen's house across the street, and my heart sank. There she was, standing in her front yard, watching me with an unsettling smile on her face. The smile wasn't one of warmth. It was mocking, as if she was waiting for me to notice something, to realize something terrible. I rushed inside, calling out for Lily, but there was no answer. My heart began to race as I searched every room, my anxiety climbing with every second that passed. Then I heard it, the faint sound of whimpering coming from the backyard. Without thinking, I bolted outside, my mind racing, already dreading what I might find. And then I saw it. My daughter, curled up in a dog cage, her body trembling, her face streaked with tears. The sight hit me like a sledgehammer. She was locked inside, a child, my child, trapped in an enclosure meant for animals. The cold metal bars of the cage felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me. I rushed to her, my hands shaking as I unlocked the cage. Lily's eyes were wide with fear, her body stiff from the terror that had overwhelmed her. She didn't even speak at first. She just clung to me as if I was her only lifeline. But before I could gather my thoughts or comfort her, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Karen was standing there, watching with a cold, emotionless gaze. The satisfaction in her eyes made my blood run cold. She didn't look ashamed or remorseful, she looked triumphant. As I turned to face her, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in, and anger, fury, and fear all collided within me. Karen didn't even flinch. Instead, she stood there, arms crossed, as if she were the one in control. "She doesn't deserve better," she said, her voice laced with venom. "She's just a burden, and you've been too soft on her. She should know her place." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My daughter, my beautiful Lily who had done nothing wrong, was being treated like this, and Karen, this woman, had the audacity to justify it with such cruelty. I could feel the fire of rage building inside me, the injustice of it all threatening to consume me. How could anyone, let alone someone who lived among us, act with such heartless disregard for another human being? In that moment, something inside me broke. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter's dignity, I was fighting against the very core of Karen's hatred, the absolute evil that had taken root in her heart. This wasn't just a matter of petty disagreements, it was about standing up to a force that sought to destroy everything we valued. Karen wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was an enemy, one who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The sense of violation was overwhelming, and as I stood there, holding my daughter and listening to Karen's cruel words, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment had arrived. The battle for my daughter's dignity for justice had begun, and Karen had no idea just how much she had underestimated the love and strength I had for my family. As I held Lily in my arms, her body trembling from the trauma she had just endured, I could feel my heart breaking. The weight of what had just happened was suffocating. Every part of me wanted to collapse, but I knew I couldn't. I had to be strong, not just for Lily, but for myself as well. She needed me to protect her, to make sure this never happened again. But I felt like I had failed her. How could I have let this happen? How could someone so vile have infiltrated our lives, destroyed our peace, and hurt my daughter in such an unforgivable way? Lily clung to me tightly, her sobs muffled against my chest. She was silent for what felt like an eternity, as if the words she wanted to say were trapped somewhere deep inside her. Her small frame shook violently, and I could feel the emotional weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had always been a fighter, but I knew this was different. This wasn't just about physical pain, it was about the cruelty of being treated like she didn't matter, like she was less than human. I tried to soothe her, telling her it would be okay, but I couldn't even convince myself. The terror she had experienced, the isolation of being locked in that cage, would stay with her for a long time, and I had no idea how to help her move past it. The fight or flight instinct within me screamed for action, for retribution. But all I could do at that moment was hold her and promise her that I wouldn't let this go unanswered. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, rage, disbelief, betrayal, but the most pressing one was how to get justice for my daughter. I knew I couldn't let Karen walk away from this without consequences. I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with this act of violence. I had to fight for Lily, for her dignity, for her future. It wasn't just about what happened in that moment. It was about ensuring no one else would have to go through what she had endured. I quickly realized that this wasn't something I could handle alone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. When they arrived, the reality of the situation hit me all over again. I stood there, surrounded by officers, my daughter still in my arms, as Karen stood across the street watching, her eyes cold and unyielding. It was as if she hadn't even a shred of remorse for what she'd done. The shock of it all made my blood boil. How could anyone, be so heartless? The police took my statement, and after hearing the details, they went to Karen's house to speak with her. I waited, hoping that something would be done, that there would be justice for my daughter. But as I stood there, I felt a growing sense of frustration. Karen was never the type to back down. She was arrogant, manipulative, and had the community wrapped around her finger. I had no idea how deep her influence ran, but I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. While the officers were speaking with Karen, I called a few close friends and family members to let them know what had happened. The outpouring of support was immediate. Neighbors who had witnessed Karen's behavior toward us in the past began coming forward, offering their accounts of the tension she'd caused in the community. They were horrified by what she had done to Lily and willing to stand by us in the face of Karen's tyranny. Karen's story was a web of lies, but the truth was beginning to unravel. The evidence was clear. Locking a disabled child in a cage was inexcusable, and the police recognized that. Within hours, Karen was officially charged with child endangerment, and the wheels of justice began turning. As for me, I wasn't going to stop there. This wasn't just about legal retribution. It was about making sure Lily felt safe again, that she would never have to face such cruelty again. The resolution wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, long discussions with Lily about what had happened, and countless moments where I wasn't sure how to help her heal. But slowly, she began to regain her confidence. The outpouring of support from the community helped rebuild her sense of self-worth. She wasn't the victim anymore, she was a survivor. And while the scars from that day would never fully disappear, we were determined to move forward, stronger than ever. I confronted Karen at one point when she was finally removed from the community's HOA. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I needed her to know that she hadn't won, that she would never break us. The conversation was brief but powerful. I told her that I would never forgive her for what she did to my daughter, and I made sure she understood that we were done with her. Karen, for all her bravado, seemed shaken, but I knew it wasn't over for her. The community had seen her true colors, and she would no longer be allowed to hide behind the facade of power she had once used to intimidate others. The real resolution came from within. It came from Lily's ability to look beyond the cage, beyond the cruelty, and see her own worth again. She had been through something no child should ever experience, but in the end, she emerged stronger, more resilient. And as a father, there was nothing more powerful than watching my daughter reclaim her dignity, her voice, and her future. We didn't win this fight by playing by Karen's rules. We won it by standing together, by refusing to back down, and by refusing to let hatred and cruelty dictate our lives. This fight wasn't just about one woman. It was about making sure our voices were heard, making sure Lily and every child like her was protected. And in the end, that was a victory I could hold on to. Just when I thought we were gaining some ground and that the legal process would bring us the justice we deserved, something happened that I never could have anticipated. A twist that completely changed the course of everything. The whole community was on edge, but there was an undercurrent of support for us. Neighbors who had been quietly observing Karen's reign of terror began to speak up. Some of them were offering their accounts to the police, others were simply expressing disbelief at what had happened. I thought that the fight was all but won until an unexpected phone call changed everything. It was from Sarah, a woman I had always considered an ally, a fellow mother in the neighborhood. She was someone I trusted, a person who had always been supportive when Lily was struggling. But when I picked up the phone, her voice was strained, hesitant, and to my surprise, apologetic. "Hey, I just wanted to let you know. I don't want you to be blindsided," Sarah said, her voice quivering. "I've been hearing things I didn't want to believe at first, but Karen didn't act alone." The shock that hit me in that moment was gut-wrenching. I was still processing the horror of what Karen had done, but now Sarah was telling me that Karen had been backed by someone else, someone within the community. It wasn't just Karen making the decisions. She had been using her position to manipulate others into supporting her twisted actions. I couldn't believe it. There was more to this than I realized. Sarah told me about a secretive meeting that had taken place between Karen and several other HOA members, all of whom had been complicit in looking the other way, or worse, turning a blind eye to Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior toward my family. What I had seen as individual incidents, small complaints, seemingly harmless requests, had actually been part of a larger organized plan. Suddenly, the fight wasn't just with Karen anymore. It was with a much larger, more powerful network within the HOA, a group of people who were all too willing to turn a blind eye to the cruelty in exchange for maintaining their status. The shock of realizing that the battle for justice was now a battle against a corrupt system was overwhelming. But the real twist came when Sarah revealed that Karen's actions were part of a personal vendetta. Years ago, Karen had been involved in a dispute with my wife, a personal matter that had been buried, long forgotten in the past. It seemed that Karen had been waiting for the right moment to take revenge, and she had chosen my daughter as the perfect target. What had seemed like random acts of cruelty were, in fact, carefully orchestrated retribution for something I had no idea even mattered to her. The weight of that revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about community rules, this was personal. And now, the gloves were off. The fight had just gotten a lot bigger. But now, I knew how deep the betrayal ran, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The aftermath of the incident was a whirlwind of emotions, legal proceedings, and ultimately a battle for justice that was far from over. Karen was immediately expelled from her position as the HOA representative, but the consequences didn't stop there. The police took swift action after the revelation of her actions, and she was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and emotional abuse. Her once powerful position in the community had been completely stripped away, and her reputation was left in ruins. The community, which had once been divided by her influence, now saw the true face of the woman they had blindly followed. People who had been hesitant to speak out against her came forward with their own stories of manipulation and abuse. It was clear that Karen had been more than just a neighbor enforcing rules. She had been a tyrant, and her control over the HOA had allowed her to get away with far too much. As for the rest of the HOA members who had enabled her, many were removed from their positions, and the community came together to form a new leadership, one built on transparency and accountability. The truth about Karen's vendetta and the corrupt network within the HOA came to light, and the new board worked hard to restore faith in the community. Despite this, there were still a few people who resisted the change, particularly some of Karen's close allies. They tried to downplay her actions, offering excuses for her behavior. But the overwhelming support from the majority of the residents made it clear that those who stood by Karen had no place in the new community vision. Emotionally and mentally, the aftermath took its toll on our family. We found ourselves constantly on edge, as if the calm we had once enjoyed was forever lost. The trauma lingered in ways we hadn't anticipated. Every noise in the night made me jump, worried that Karen might somehow find a way to target us again. My wife and I struggled to support Lily as she came to terms with what had happened. There were moments when she would sit in silence, tears in her eyes, as the weight of the incident resurfaced. It was clear that the emotional scars would take time to heal. For Lily, the impact was profound. At first, she withdrew from others, refusing to leave the house and avoiding any situations where she might have to confront what had happened. But over time, with therapy, support from her family, and the encouragement of those who truly cared about her, Lily began to recover. Slowly but surely, she regained her confidence, her spark. The love and support from our neighbors, who had witnessed Karen's cruelty, helped remind Lily that she was not defined by the actions of one hateful person. She was strong, resilient, and worthy of respect. While the scars of that day will never fully disappear, the aftermath gave us the opportunity to rebuild, not just our lives, but our sense of self. We had fought back and we had won. It wasn't easy, but it showed us the strength of our bond as a family and the incredible power of community. In the end, we learned that even in the darkest moments, there is light. And that light, for us, was the love and support we had for each other. After the harrowing events unfolded, the legal consequences for Karen were swift and undeniable. Once the police were notified of her actions, an investigation was launched, and the evidence was irrefutable. Karen was charged with child endangerment, emotional abuse, and unlawful confinement. The severity of her actions, including locking my disabled daughter in a dog cage, led to a full legal examination. Karen's once influential position within the HOA did little to shield her from the legal repercussions. She was arrested, and a court date was set, marking the beginning of the end for her reign of terror. As the charges mounted, Karen found herself losing not just her position, but her credibility within the community. As for the HOA, the response was a mixed bag. In the beginning, there were some attempts to protect Karen, with a few board members trying to downplay the severity of her actions. However, the growing pressure from the community made it impossible for them to ignore the truth. Public outrage over Karen's behavior forced the HOA to act decisively. She was removed from her position as the HOA representative, and the remaining board members who had enabled her were also ousted. A new leadership team was put in place, one committed to transparency, inclusivity, and a fresh start for the neighborhood. The community's reaction was one of collective shock and horror, but also one of unity. Neighbors who had been hesitant to speak out against Karen's influence began to stand together, sharing their stories and supporting our family. This event served as a wake-up call for everyone, showing that unchecked power within any organization, especially something as close-knit as an HOA, could lead to serious harm. Morally, this situation revealed the deep impact of hate-driven actions. It emphasized the importance of standing up against injustice and the need for community accountability. The consequences were not just about punishing Karen. It was about restoring the trust and dignity that had been violated, ensuring that no one in the community would ever have to suffer at the hands of someone like her again. The shocking events that transpired serve as a painful but powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and respect for every individual, regardless of their circumstances. It's easy to overlook how crucial these values are until we face moments of deep injustice, moments when the very core of our humanity is tested. This experience taught me that we must always stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, especially when the vulnerability of individuals is exploited by those in positions of power. One of the most vital lessons learned was how unchecked authority, when used for personal gain or fueled by hate, can have devastating consequences. Karen's abuse of power within the HOA wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a larger, toxic culture where compassion was replaced with control and respect was substituted for dominance. It showed me that no one, whether disabled or not, should ever be treated as less than human, as if they do not deserve the same rights and dignity as anyone else. This was not just an attack on my daughter, it was an attack on our shared humanity. For the community, this incident highlighted the importance of accountability and collective responsibility. It was clear that, while Karen's actions were despicable, they could not have reached this level without the complacency of others who stood by, ignoring the signs. Silence in the face of injustice is not an option. Communities must hold each other accountable and not allow individuals to get away with harmful behaviors simply because they hold a position of authority or influence. By standing together, we can foster an environment where everyone feels safe, valued, and heard. The true moral from this incident is simple yet profound. Treat others with kindness, respect, and empathy, especially those who are most vulnerable. Disability should never be a reason for discrimination or mistreatment. It should be a reason for understanding and support. Everyone, regardless of their differences, deserves to be treated with dignity and to feel a sense of belonging within their community. This incident, though heartbreaking, opened our eyes to the profound impact that empathy and respect can have in preventing harm and fostering true community cohesion. If you believe in justice for all, regardless of ability or background, now is the time to take a stand. No one should be subjected to cruelty, discrimination, or abuse, especially within their own community. Get involved, whether it's standing up for a neighbor, holding those in power accountable, or supporting victims of injustice. Together, we can create a safer, more inclusive world for everyone. If you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, I encourage you to share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. This isn't just about HOA issues, it's about fighting for dignity, equality, and respect for everyone. Don't let silence win. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, share this video, and let's keep this conversation going. Together, we make a difference. Thank you all for watching and supporting this journey. Your presence, your attention, and your voice mean more than you know. This story is far from over. It's a reminder that justice is something we must all fight for, and together we can stand against cruelty and abuse. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure to subscribe to HOA Denied Access for more powerful stories like this. The fight for dignity, respect, and equality continues, and every one of us plays a part in shaping a better future. Let's keep this conversation going, keep fighting for what's right, and keep pushing for the change we deserve. Stay strong, stay empowered, and remember, justice begins with us. See you in the next video.